Hi, class. All right, let's see what Helmut's up to today. Helmut graduates, and May finds him working at the Bieber House, a social welfare department at the City Hall. It's a coveted apprenticeship, one awarded to those who excel in school and who are expected to move into important government positions. Hugo is proud. "With your head, the government can use you," Hugo tells him. Soon Helmut knows his way around the administrative offices, and one morning he's sent to file papers in a basement storeroom. He swings open the storeroom door and gropes for the light switch. The single overhead bulb floods the room, and he blinks in amazement. From floor to ceiling he sees books, rows and rows of books. In amazement, he trails his finger across the dusty spines, reads the names of forbidden authors such as Thomas Mann and his brother Heinrich Mann, the Jewish writer Heinrich Heine, the author Erika Maria Remarque, the philosopher Karl Marx, the American author Jack London, and more. Helmut feels stunned. He thought those books had all been burned 8 years earlier, but here they are, in the dusty storeroom beneath City Hall. He plucks a book from the shelf, Geist und Tat, Spirit and Action by Heinrich Mann, who criticized Germany's growing fascism so loudly that he was forced to flee after Hitler became chancellor. Helmut hesitates. He knows the risk reading such a book would pose. It could get him fired or worse, cause serious trouble for his family. He starts to wedge the book back into its place, but stops, holds it in both hands as if weighing it. Why are the Nazis so afraid of words? What do they want him to know? Helmut can't explain it, but reading that book feels necessary as breath. He won't be caught, not if he's careful. Helmut slips the book beneath his shirt, shuts off the light, eases the door closed, returns upstairs to the desk. Helmut glances at the other apprentices, Gerhard Duhr, Werner Kranz, and at his boss, Heinrich Mons, who is at the office Bieber Bobsman. It's Herr Mons' job to ensure that all employees are loyal Nazis. They are all bent busily over their desks. Helmut's heart beats wildly as he sits at his desk and slides the book from his shirt into his satchel. No one suspects a thing. Several nights later, Oma and Opa are sitting in the couch listening to the RRG when Rudy visits after supper. Helmut beckons him to his bedroom and closes the door. He reaches beneath his mattress, takes out the Heinrich Mann book, and shows him. "Heinrich Mann! Where did you get that?" whispers Rudy. "At work," says Helmut in an excited whisper. "There's a whole storeroom filled with forbidden books, rows and rows of them." Rudy backs away. "You're crazy," he says. "Do you know how much trouble you can get in if the Gestapo catch you stealing books?" "I didn't steal it. I borrowed it. And the Gestapo have better things to do than catch me." Helmut thumbs through Gustentat, stops at a page he had lightly outlined with a pencil. "Listen to this. Heinrich Mann says that revelations are rare because people are too selfish. They think only of themselves." Rudy looks at Helmut incredulously. "You want to start a revolution? Think about it. If more Germans spoke out, leaders like Hitler's won't be allowed to lie and say, 'I want peace,' and then start war." Helmut jabs at the page with his forefinger. "The French knew how to overthrow oppression and tyranny. We could learn a lot from the French." "Helmut," says Rudy, shocked, "you could get arrested for saying such things." Helmut continues to flip through the book. "Just look at the French Revolution. Look at their motto, equality, liberty, fraternity. That was their battle cry. Those are the things we've given up, that the Nazis have taken from us." Rudy's face folds into worry. "What is it you want, Helmut?" Helmut sits, closes his eyes, takes a deep breath, feels a warm calm fill him, and suddenly knows. He opens his eyes. "Gustentat," he says, "spirit and action." That's what Helmut wants. By June, it seems as though Hitler can do no wrong. The Nazis have overrun Greece and Yugoslavia. Some countries join the Germans: Yugoslavia, Greece, Bulgaria, Italy, and Romania. On Saturday night, Helmut is eating dinner with Moody and Hugo, a rare occurrence since Helmut has moved in with his grandparents. Helmut spears a potato dumpling with his fork when Hugo says, "Have you heard your old friend Heinrich Wolbs has been arrested?" "Arrested for what?" "That old fool," says Hugo, "doesn't know enough to keep his mouth shut and to keep his opinions to himself. He spouted off about a Nazi statue. What did he say? Asks Moody, clearly worried. Hugo shakes his head in disbelief. Another Nazi butcher that we must salute. That's what he said. What does he think he's going to gain? He knows the law. How could they arrest an old man, says Moody. Hugo pounds the table with his fist. We're at war! We can't permit such defeatist talk. Complainers and grumblers, doubters and agitators, they only serve to embolden the enemy. Moody grows quiet. Helmut pushes himself away from the table, doesn't feel like eating. He leaves the flat, doesn't feel like going home to his grandparents. He feels like walking along the river bile and watches the water sweeping past. His head throbs with sorrow and anger and disgust. Just as Heinrich Mann said, no one is willing to go against the current, to take a stand. Life is too short to think about others. The next day, Helmut finds Rudy and Karl before church. I have terrible news, says Helmut. The Gestapo arrested Brother Warbs. Heinrich Warbs, says Karl. Why? Helmut tells them what Hugo had said, that Brother Warbs was denounced by someone who heard him criticize the Nazis, and now he was taken into protective custody. Protective custody, says Karl sarcastically. And what are they protecting him from? Nunengam, says Helmut. Not a place for a 66-year-old man, says Rudy, his voice filled with sympathy. It is well known that Nunengam is a concentration camp near Hamburg, notorious for its subhuman conditions, where brutal guards force prisoners to do hard labor with inadequate food and live in squalid cells. We have no one to blame but ourselves, says Helmut. The Nazis tell us what to think, what to feel. They tell us to hate. We call it love. They tell us to denounce our neighbors, and we call it patriotism. But look at what they do to people who dare challenge them, says Karl. They crush dissent any way they can. It's June 22, 1941, a hot summer day, and the boys meet after work at the community swimming pool at Ohlsdorf. They shake out the towels, spread them on the grass. Through loudspeakers surrounding the pool, a Schultz sonata plays, violins and cellos. Karl and Rudy are discussing Hitler's closest friend and third highest Nazi, Rudolf Hess, who has been missing for several weeks. The Nazis claim that Comrade Hess met with an accident over the North Sea while piloting a fighter plane. The Fuhrer says that Hess was deranged, in no condition to fly, says Karl. Apparently he's been suffering hallucinations. Do you think he's dead, asks Rudy. No, he's deranged, or he's dead, says Helmut, without thinking. He's not either. He's sitting in a British jail. Rudy and Karl move closer. How do you know that? Asks Rudy. Helmut realizes he's given himself away. The BBC announced Hess's desertion weeks ago. Hess had commandeered a fighter plane and landed in Glasgow, Scotland, where he was captured. The BBC call it the greatest escape in history. Helmut toys with the idea of telling his friends the truth. He knows he can trust them, but he doesn't get the chance to answer. Suddenly, the music stops, interrupted by a strident voice announcer. Achtung, says the announcer. Attention! At 4:15 this morning, German troops crossed the Soviet border and our Ludendorff began to bomb Soviet naval air bases, destroying 1/4 of Russian Air Force. At 6 a.m., the Fuhrer declared war on Russia. There's a flare of military music, and then Adolf Hitler's voice comes over the radio. German people, shouts Hitler, at this moment, an attack unprecedented in the history of the world in its extent and size has begun. The purpose of this front is no longer the protection of the individual nation, but the safety of Europe, and therefore the salvation of everyone. May God help us in this battle. All around, men, women, and children freeze in their places. Stone still, their faces are worried. They swallow hard, speak in hushed whispers. Now we're fighting the British and the Russians, says Karl. This will take double the troops and military supplies, whispers Helmut. Every day the Germans spend at the Russian front will gain for the British. But we've got the best army in the world, says Rudy. And if Hitler wins Russia, think of it. Think of what it will give him. Russian airplanes and tanks and guns. But Helmut knows different. No one in history has ever conquered the Russians. Now, how many more people will have to die? On the RRG, Helmut hears how the advancing Germans capture or kill great numbers of Russian soldiers, but the RRG never lists German losses. And so, for the truth, Helmut tunes to the BBC. Late each night, he opens the hall closet and takes out the roller radio. He locks the flat door and then hears a different story about German planes destroyed by the Russians, sunken transport ships, and soldiers killed or captured. The Russians are fighting bitterly and bravely, but only Helmut seems to know. When the BBC broadcast ends, he has trouble falling asleep. The BBC keys him up, makes him hate Hitler and the Nazis and their secrets and lies all the more, makes him ache and worry for Gerhard. Some mornings, Oma comments on the dark circles under Helmut's eyes. She presses her hand against his forehead to check for fever. "Are you getting enough sleep?" she asks. "I'm fine, Oma," he says. "There's nothing to worry about." But he knows plenty that worries him. And one warm August night, as Helmut walks with Karl along the Bile, their talk turns to the war in Russia. The German people have been asked to donate woolen and fur clothing for the soldiers at the Russian front, where winter comes early. "All the fur and woolen clothing can't prepare our soldiers for winter in Russia," says Karl. "Our luck can't hold," says Helmut. "No army has ever won in Russia, not even Frederick the Great or Napoleon." "If we stop now, we'd have Austria and the Sudetenland and Poland," says Karl. "Isn't that enough?" "Europe isn't enough for Hitler," Helmut says bitterly. "Hitler believes that world peace can only come through German domination." The two friends walk on in silence. Their secrets Helmut keeps to himself weighs heavier with each step. He thinks of Heinrich Mann and feels selfish. God gave him the ability to think for himself, and yet he fears doing what he knows is right. He longs to share the truth with Karl. "You know what I think?" he says to Karl. "I'm afraid to ask," answers Karl. Helmut lowers his voice. "Our government is lying to us. That's what I think." Karl winces and draws away. "It's dangerous to think that much," he says. "Freedom has always been dangerous," says Helmut. "Come to my place tonight, and I'll prove the Nazis are lying. But wait until after 9, after my grandparents go to bed." All right, guys. See you later.